Join us on the Swim Monkey.
Swim Monkey TV. On the Monkey.
How you doing, everybody? Welcome to Stories, June 22, 2020. And boy, what a crazy summer it's been. We're only in the second day. Tonight, as usual, we've got a couple good storytellers. And I'm very, very blessed to have Joe and Bess Auer produce this show. And my good friend Joe is going to help me run this show because tonight his roots are kind of intertwined with one of our guests, and we have two Gator greats that we've built. We are going to be bringing in this evening, and without any further ado, let's welcome in coach of the 2012 Olympic team as head coach. Twice before he was assistant, and gosh, he's been coaching the Cali Condors this year in the Pro League. Everybody knows him as the great Gator coach. For 20 years, he had Bolles and brought them out into elite worldwide status. Gregg Troy, my good friend Gregg Troy from Gainesville. Welcome, Greg. How you doing up there?
That's all real good. It's been great. It's hot.
Yeah, it's summertime. And while we're speaking of Gainesville, you know, one of the greats, and I'm going to ask Joe to come in with this esteemed coach. He was a head coach, actually, of the Gators for a couple years, longtime assistant coach. And Joe, you knew him as the Winter Park coach, where my understanding was this is Joe Auer. So let's welcome Joe in properly.
Hey, guys. Hey, guys.
What's the latest, Joe?
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be an awesome show tonight.
So, Joe, would you bring our next guest in? Because you've known him since you were about 13, maybe?
Yeah, so I left Harry Mizell when I was 12. He kicks everybody out when we're 12, or right when we turn 13. And I hear about this guy for years and years and years. Oh my gosh, he's hard, whatever. And just scared to death. I go over there, and of course, Skip Foster is there. He's this huge guy, scared to death. I'm a little 13-year-old, and Skip Foster's there, and you know he's awesome. He's everything that people said, and he can still beat me in dips and pull-ups for sure. I'm kind of embarrassed, and you know
he can beat most of the human population in dips and pull. Hey, right, Skip?
and there's Skip Foster.
Skip, yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. I have to cheat a little bit more now, but I still work out.
I don't even cheat. So
now, Skip, we heard from you earlier that you're working out daily with your 16-year-old grandson, and you're 76, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So how's that going?
He kicks my butt every day, especially doing stadiums. So
oh boy,
I really slowed down there, but no, we have a good time. He's a real good kid. He works hard in the weight room, and he's getting a little better in the pool. So we have a lot of fun.
So now I know that you and Gregg Troy had some crossover years because your years at Florida, besides, I was just telling Joe, I remembered when Randy Reeves suddenly retired and you became the head coach. You, of course, were assistant with Randy for 8 or 9 years at least, right?
9 years. Yeah, 9 years.
But you had some previous relationship with him, and I'd like you to tell us about that and tell us how you first met Gregg Troy and how you got to know him.
Well, when I was at Winter Park, we used to come up, and I would always try to schedule a really hard best teams. And we would come up every year and start the season in Jacksonville. We'd swim Bolles one day and Episcopal the next day. And, of course, you know, that went through when Randy was at Bolles, then Randy went to Episcopal, and then John Stafford and Gary Butts, and then Gregg came on the scene. And so we would go up there every year and start the season off by getting murdered by Bolles and Episcopal.
That wasn't the case when I was there the first couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think maybe my women's team was the last one to beat Gregg the entire time he was there at Bolles, actually, one year. But no, it was funny because I would always come back to work on Monday morning, and the Winter Park coaches would go like, "Wow, Skip, I thought you were going to have a good team this year." I'd say, "Yeah, well, we are, but I just swam half the Olympic team this weekend." But no, it was a good way to start the year because it showed how much work we needed to do and stuff.
And so, Greg, what's your memory when you first met Skip Foster? Because you were coaching first on the west coast of Florida before you got to Jacksonville, right? Tell us a little bit about your origins in the career of coaching.
When I graduated from TCU, I went to Fort Myers in '72. I was from Sarasota and swam for the Sharks and swam at Sarasota High. And I went to Fort Myers, got a job down there at a middle school, and ended up coaching. I wasn't planning on doing it. But the high school came to me and asked if I'd coach. And it was at Cypress Lake High School. And I think, Skip, what were you there 2 years before?
Well, I was there the first year it opened. So that was 69, I think.
Okay. And I was there. I went there in the fall of 70. I went there. I coached him the fall of 72 and then taught there in 73.
Yeah. I went from Cypress Lake to Lyman to Winter Park.
And then, so I spent 5 years down there, and that's where I first met Skip because he was working for Tom Lamar in Winter Park when I met him. And I was coaching in Fort Myers. I coached Fort Myers Swim Association. And
now, as a late comer to Florida, I didn't get here till 1983, but I always heard that name, Tom Lamar. Skip, what can you tell us about him?
How much time do we have? They threw away the mold with Mr. Lamar. He started coaching down in Lake Worth, and he won state championships at Lake Worth High, then at Fort Lauderdale with the Flying Elves, and then at Pinecrest. He was actually Jack Nelson's college coach at the University of Miami. I think all in all, Mr. Lamar won 29 state championships. And then he moved up to Winter Park, and his goal was to win the state championship. I don't think a school from Orange County had won in like 30 or 40 years. And he did. He won in 1973 with some great girls. They won the girls. And I was at Lyman. I was helping him with the Winter Park Y team. And he retired after that from coaching and asked me if I wanted to go to Winter Park. And I was like, are you kidding? So, I mean, basically I walked into just an unbelievable situation. But Mr. Lamar himself was probably one of the smartest guys I've ever met. Hard taskmaster, unafraid of anything. I can't tell you how many times I thought I was going to die on a pool deck with lightning flashing all around, and he wouldn't let anybody out. It was scary sometimes. But he was just a great guy.
All old school stuff.
I want to know why he always walked around with an umbrella, and it would be blue skies. So he would have an umbrella in his hand the whole time.
Because every once in a while he would use it on someone's head. In fact, one of the funniest things I've ever heard him say was he got inducted into the International Hall of Fame. And he got up, and he was older at the time, moved kind of slow, and got up, and he got in front of this whole crowd down at the Hall of Fame. And he asked all the swimmers that he had coached, that he'd hit on the head with the umbrella, to stand up. And like 3/4 of the crowd stood up. And he said he wanted to apologize to him. But no, he was very old school. He didn't put up with anything, no parents on the deck. If you didn't like what he was doing, there were a lot of other swim teams you could go to.
Yeah, that's the way to put it.
Yeah.
He was always good about sharing things too. He was
I was very lucky because at the same time I was working for Miss Lamar, I was working for Harry Mizell, who Joe just referenced. And same kind of guy, no nonsense. Joe will tell you with 10 and 11 and 12-year-old kids, he'd reach in the pool and yank you out if you weren't doing what he asked.
Hey, so Charlie, it's what you're saying there, Skip, and Charlie's watching. And he could probably chime in and type in what he did, but he and Brandon wrote something on the wall. And of course, Harry Mizell, being in the Battle of the Bulge, said, boys, get your toothbrushes out. And he made him clean the entire wall with the toothbrush. This is Harry Mizell. They're cleaning the walls with a toothbrush, It's just,
so I had some really great mentors when I first started, and I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
Well, Skip, you've always been such a gentleman. I know that I told a little story last week about how gracious you were when you and Randy were recruiting Jason Gorey, and I had just taken over. Ed Brennan coached Jason growing up. I inherited Jason when I got to Tampa, and it was hard to screw him up. He was, one of those that came and did so much with Matt Sitlinski, of course. But then I look at your career, and no matter what position you held at the University of Florida, everyone always said, "Oh, Skip Foster, he's a great guy, good guy." And I know that it had to be tough on you when Randy left all of a sudden in April, and the stories where I remember sharing Rob's story because I was looking it up today, doing some research, and the idea was that Arnsparger, the athletic director, and Randy, a lot of coaches had left that year for personal reasons, I guess. So you came in kind of as the interim coach first, and then you were head coach for a couple years before maybe Chris Martin came, and then eventually Gregg. But tell us a little bit about that. I know that what I read, guys like Zubero and Nesty, world champions in Perth, 91 Worlds were that year. They were both reigning, and then, of course, became Olympic champions. But the idea that, the assistant coach all of a sudden is going to be the head coach at University of Florida. How did you handle that, and what was going through those days in Gainesville?
That was a really bad time when Randy left, because all those kids had come to swim for Randy that you just mentioned. Martin Zubero, Anthony Nesty, Bob Utley, Brent Mitchell, Jason Gorey, all of them. And so they made me the interim coach, and we're going to conduct a search. And what happened was that some of those guys went to Mr. Arnsparger and Jeremy Foley, who became the athletic director, and said that if I wasn't named the head coach, they were all going to transfer. So I was really reluctant to take it for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I'd been such a good friend with Randy, and Randy had treated me great. And I just felt bad about taking over the program like that. And number two, I didn't really want to be the head coach because I didn't like to travel and I didn't like to recruit. I just like to be on the pool deck and coach. So I told Mr. Foley that I would take it, but I'd only take it for 2 years. I'd get those guys through to Barcelona. Greg Burgess transferred that year from Tennessee. So I had Greg and Anthony and Martin all win medals in Barcelona. And then I went back in and said, okay, I was the head coach and I told you I was going to quit. And I did. I think he was a little surprised, but he said, well, we're going to bring somebody in, and I can't make any promises that they'll keep you. And I said, well, I'll take a chance. I'll see what happens. And, I don't have any problem going back to being a high school coach if I have to or something. And luckily, Chris got the job, and I had known Chris. I'd recruited a bunch of his kids from the Petty School. So I worked with Chris for his first 3 years, and it was a good relationship. Chris, probably the smartest guy that I've ever been around. He went to Yale, swam for Frank Keith, and he was a great coach, hardworking guy, treated me great. And I got nothing but great memories of Chris. But then I had an opportunity in 95 to go in administration and do some other stuff that I kind of looked forward to doing. And so I did.
Hey, listen, so I've seen you run the clock at the basketball game for 25, 30 years.
35.
Okay. 35.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I saw you like last year. I'm like, well, there's freaking Skip.
Yeah. I'm probably going to die on the table there. They're just
More on the finger on that clock now.
I'm like, Skip, you've been there 35 years. Come on, give us a freaking hand here.
I've won a lot of close games for the Gators.
Well, Skip, I remember one I came to wearing Florida State gear, and your tennis coach had just switched over to Tallahassee. And knowing that you graduated from Florida State University.
Yeah, I graduated with Randy. Yeah,
and you knew Randy in college.
I kind of knew him. I wasn't a swimmer. I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps and gotten married, and Patty and I lived in married housing there. But I mean, I'd go to some swim meets and stuff. Being real honest with you, I always thought I was going to end up being a basketball coach. I really liked basketball, and I used to hang around with Coach Durham and all those guys. And I started at Cypress Lake, that Gregg said, as a basketball coach. And when I went to Lyman, they said, well, they'd hire me, but I had to coach swimming too. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. And,
hey, Skip, did y'all build the pool at Lyman? Did you build the pool?
No, that was Don Clark. We built the pool at Winter Park.
Okay.
Yeah. I say we.
So at Lyman, Skip, you're coaching both basketball and swimming.
And ninth grade football. We were 0-8.
So it got you out of football.
Oh yeah. I'm probably the only ninth grade coach that ever got fired. So
so then so you end up with Randy. Now you had worked with Randy before University of Florida, right?
Well, I hadn't really worked with him, but lots of times when we'd go to a meet, we'd stay together. Our teams would stay in the same place. I'd room with Randy or something. And I was always trying to pick his brain because, to this day, I think he's still probably one of the most innovative coaches I've ever seen. When I got there in 81, we were doing stuff that nobody else in the country was doing. In fact, a lot of people are doing it now, but, Randy was really the first guy to do a lot of, we were doing stadiums, we were doing ramps, we were doing baskets. Vince Stefano and I would go to Publix at the start of the year and steal a bunch of milk cartons from Publix, fill them with weights. And
well, I've heard Joe cry about that, but I do want to get over here to Coach Troy because by the time go ahead, Coach. When now Skip, when you saw Gregg, so you had Chris Martin for about 4 years.
Yeah, 3.
And then now Gregg had been coaching at Bolles School for 2 decades, the most successful high school coach in the country.
Yeah.
And what was the process? Was it the same athletic director? How did Gregg get hired? Then Gregg, I want to hear your perspective because I know we heard it from the rival high schools in Florida. Like, hey, Troy might be getting the Gator job. And there's not many NCAA D1 teams that would ever hire a club coach. But Skip, first from you, what was your perspective? Then let's toss it to Gregg and hear what he had coming in.
Well, actually, when I resigned in 92, we tried to go after Gregg. Right, Gregg?
Yeah.
And he turned it down because he was making so much money at Bolles.
and his kids were young, right? They were young and they were going to a good school. But go ahead, Skip.
Yeah. No, but and so when he turned it down, they hired Chris, and then so when Chris left, actually I'm trying to think of this now. Golly, I'm getting old. I have to go back, but
Gregg.
Hey, keep in mind, Skip, you did 76 dips today. Keep in mind you did that, and none of us did. Okay, just keep in mind.
Actually, so we hired Sticks Bellatori to coach them in. We wanted to separate the programs, so we hired Sticks. God bless him. And then Gregg came in as a women's coach, and then a couple of years later, when Sticks kind of transferred into administration, Gregg took over both. But no, I thought Gregg. I mean, the entire time I was in Florida, from 1981 to coaching until 95, half our kids came from Bolles. Half of them came from Gregg. I mean, you just go back from the Barrows all the way down. And I would really try hard to recruit Burgess, and he didn't come. But then when Randy left, he transferred into us. But
he wanted to swim for Gregg. He wasn't too keen.
No, I don't think he was keen on swimming for Randy. And Randy wasn't for everybody.
His sister had swum for Tremblay at Mercersburg, so Tremblay had known him since he was real young.
Yeah. But no, when Gregg came with the women, I thought it was a great move. I knew right then that Florida was in good hands for however long Gregg was going to stay there.
Forever. Forever.
Seems like it's turned that way out. Coach Troy, let's hear from you. Give us your perspective on making that change from Bolles to Florida and what it's meant to you in your career.
Well, I was really fortunate because I was in a great situation at Bolles, and I'd worked for the same headmaster the entire time there, Harry DeMont Mullen. I think Skip knew him. Skip he doesn't say anything. Skip went to Bolles.
Yeah,
Skip was going to border it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I graduated in 61 from Bolles. We were 4th in the state. I just looked it up because I thought this might be interesting. They had I was a 400 freestyler. This was before the 500, and I got 4th. I got 4th in the state, but my time was slower than Sharon Finneran, who won the girls' state championship. She went 4:30 flat. I don't know what I went, but I just remembered it was slower than the girls' winning time.
And what year did you finish at high school?
61. So.
Okay. So that was before Duff Tyler's days. But Gregg, when you're thinking about all the great years at Florida, go ahead and tell us how that transition went and kind of what your building points were. You're coming in, certainly. It's got a great tradition, all the Reeves years. Then you have Chris Martin and the great Ron Ballatoy. Geez, we could talk a whole show on sticks. Oh, man. Go ahead, Gregg.
Well, when I came in, the girls hadn't been very good, but Kevin Thornton had done a great job with them. Kevin had been the women's coach, and he'd done a great job with them. There's some talented girls there. And that first year, we just kind of got them all on the same page. And presented a little bit of a team concept, and they bought into it. It was a really good group of girls. We swam. When I talked to Jeremy Foley about taking the job, I explained to him that I didn't just want to be another college program. That we wanted to give people a little bit more of an opportunity to do well internationally. Not that they hadn't, but that one, I wanted that to be the focus. And those girls bought in the first year. We were kind of awful all season long, and swam average at the conference meet. We got the people we needed to the NC2A meet, and then they swam really well at the NC2A meet. And it was kind of a nice mixture of some seniors that had been there a while and hadn't been quite as good as they wanted to be, and some young girls that I came in real late. Class was so that kind of no one had recruited them. Maybe they weren't thinking about swimming at all in college, and convinced a couple of them to do that. And then they did a really good job. And then from that point, we just got a little bit better. We worked pretty hard at it. And we're fortunate, like Skip said, we'd had a lot of Bolles kids go to Florida. And it was far back as my first years at Bolles, David Zabera would come home in the summer and train with us in Gainesville. And always had never had the advantage of working with Randy, but always was close to Skip and Randy in those early years. And they gave some real good information. So I always had a pretty good idea what they were doing. Saw some of it firsthand and some of it from the athletes themselves when they came home. So had an idea of what the work ethic was and where we were going to go. We just kind of put a priority on working hard.
Hey, Sid, so Skip probably knows, but we never lost we never lost to Bolles in my years in high school. and Prokes always talks about where he and Gregg were next to each other doing relays, and both relays would get All-American. I had a dual meet, and it was pretty fun at Winter Park High School. I remember that all the time. It was fun stuff. But anyway, Sid.
Yeah, Joe, I do. And Gregg, I do see that. I mean, I watched this evolution of NCAA swimming. And of course, those of us in this box of squares, we remember when the women really didn't swim in NC2As. And then when they brought you in, Gregg, as a women's coach, and I guess, and you were working with Sticks, and then he moved on, I guess. But as I recall, when you became the head coach of both men and women, Sticks was still very much around the pool and a big part of the program. Of course, I had known him through my UCLA connections and had gotten to work a couple national teams with him. But when you changed this from being just the women's coach at University of Florida, and now you're taking on a combined program, what was that like? What was that change like for you?
I think a lot of it was staffing. I was fortunate to have a really good staff. I brought Martin Wilby with me from Bolles, and Martin had a really good rapport with people. He knew what I was looking for. Great assistant coach from that standpoint. He was the head coach and had all those capabilities. He just didn't want all the time. He was good at covering when you'd miss something. And then kept Anthony Nesti on. He'd been Stick's assistant. But I had the good fortune to work with Sticks. Even before I went from Bolles to Florida, Sticks guys had trained with us in the summer, and we would swim together. And I learned a lot about sprinting from Sticks. I learned a lot of things from Sticks. But sprinting was one.
We all did. I mean, that guy was incredible. Yeah, I know Seth. He was your head for the Maccabeah games. He was incredible. I was talking to Dave Marsh about a story we had in Rome, but. Where we are tonight, what I was getting at, Greg, with that idea that, you know, how the NCAA, and I want to pick your brain specifically and love to hear Joe and Skip's comments on where the NCAA is headed. But at that time, you were combining programs. So you had a great staff. And there was a guy right up the road who actually was combining programs up in Tallahassee. And I'd like to bring in our special guest at this time, Coach Terry Mall. Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
I know you know both these gentlemen well, so go ahead and greet them, Terry.
I do. Hey, Skip. Hey, Terry.
It has been.
Greg, I was just on the phone with you a few days ago. So
yeah. And I have a lot of good friends in coaching. I learned a lot from both these two guys. I mean, Terry's been at was at FSU for an eternity, and Skip when he was a rival in high schools, but always friendly rivals. It's always great. When I was in Fort Myers, we had Cypress Lake. We had a real good high school team, and for a public school, we were pretty good, but we were always behind Clearwater and Winter Park High. And but I learned a lot from those guys.
So Terry, I know that, I mean, I was blessed to work with you for years at Florida State. And, you know, we had separate, I was hired actually, Greg and Skip, as a part-time assistant with no benefits for the men and the women. And then they combined it. They said, okay, I said, I'll come up. It was a pittance. It was both were part, but then Terry, to my benefit, his credit, was able to push it together along with Bill Schultz, and we had a combined team. Terry, your relationship with these guys, do you remember Skip from college days or Randy or any of those guys back in the day?
Yeah, I definitely do. The years that I started at Florida State, I really got the job as a graduate assistant for the first 4 years, and only way I could make ends meet was to coach the club team in town too. And so I coached the club team and got to know Greg through some travels. Actually, the first time I really remember running into Greg was up at a regional meet in Alabama. And we had a few good younger boys on the team, and we had a pretty good 800 free relay. I think it finished somewhere close to 8 minutes in the 800 free relay. And, of course, Tallahassee wasn't a very big team and didn't have many kids on the team. I remember Greg coming up to me and congratulating me on the performance of that 800 free relay. And, you know, this was a guy who, you know, coached over at Bolles and, you know, done great things. And I was really impressed with that and impressed with the fact that he saw what everybody did in the pool, not just what his kids did. And I remember Skip over at Florida, the story I don't know if he remembers the meet up in Brunel where Randy turned in the wrong card. And then they had a coaches meeting to find out if they would. And of course, the coaches meeting that I was in voted to uphold the mistake that, you know, wrong name on the card. So the relay got DQ'd. And Randy never forgave me for that. Came to Florida State the next year, and I think he beat us 175-12 or something like that. I imagine Skip remembers that one because Randy, as you know, can hold a grudge. But, but I was impressed by Gregg's compliment, and remembered that to this day. And a lot of other things I learned from him as well. I remember sitting at a couple of meets over on the Bolles deck, and Gregg and I got to know each other pretty well. And he kind of had a reputation of reaming his swimmers if they weren't doing what he wanted to do.
No, not Troy. No.
He could go up one side of him and down the other. And I remember sitting there one time, this little girl walks up, and I mean, he'd just given it to her, and she's in tears, and he's not backing down a bit. And she walks off, and I'm sitting there going, how in the world can you do that? How can this kid even come back to practice after you do that? But then I noticed about 20 or 30 minutes later, I watched him, and he took the time to get up and go find that kid again, and he did follow up with him. And I learned that for the rest of my career. I'd get on a kid, and then I'd make sure to take the time 10 or 15 minutes later to go sit back down with them and explain why I was so concerned or why I was so upset with their behavior in the pool. And, he taught me a lot there, and that's helped me in my relationships with my swimmers for years, to just that one behavior. I think is really important.
I think the key to that is they have to know you care, and they also need to know that you're honest with them. And at the same time, you can't expect them to be passionate about what they're doing if you're not passionate too. And sometimes that passion can get a little out of control. But it's always try to make sure that you had to have done something really bad, that if you got in trouble, that I didn't get to you before you left. Very seldom do I let someone leave and have to take it home.
Well, I hear you use that word, Gregg, passion. That's one my coach, Bob Matson, he was adamant about. Look, don't come if you're not going to bring passion. You know, you hear it in every sport. The guys on the sports radio talking about your passion bucket. But when it really comes down to it in swimming, and what we've done as a community is really evolved the sport. And we look at all the old stories like the Lamars, and okay, we're going to go 5, 10K, Matson, we're going to go 8,000 fly. But the training has changed so much. And I know, Terry, you've been a great student of technique and certainly of science. Skip, you've seen a lot of changes. And Gregg, when you think about the great sets that some of your athletes, and I do want to take a moment, Joe, just to mention that there is a book coming out. Jackson Leonard's co-writing it, as I understand, Gregg, with you, and it's going to come out. You can pre-order this book, all about the title of it maybe being "It's Never Easy," is what I heard. Is that correct, Gregg?
I think that might be it. I'm not sure, but it isn't easy.
Okay.
It's not an easy sport.
It's not.
Everyone could do it.
So
It's
I'm
not an easy
understanding that Jackson Leonard, of course, John Leonard's son, who had spent a lot of time up there in Gainesville, and is working on that with Olympic swimmers like Ryan Lochte and Caleb Dressel and 15 other Olympians as I go. And for anybody who wants to pre-order, if you go to Instagram at Jackson W Leonard, Leonard, you can get more details on it. But where do you see, Gregg, with this, the grind, and from the days of the 80s and the heavy duty to where we are now, and I would say we're training so much smarter, but probably so much better now. But the future of training and then the future of collegiate athletics has been called into question. What do you see going on here in the next 5 to 10 years, Coach Troy?
I think the training, we become more efficient about what we do. I know for myself, it became a little more of learning from the athletes, taking the information they give you and deciphering it for them. I think that sometimes people have misconstrued that change. It doesn't change the amount of time it takes to be successful. It might change what you're doing within that time period, but sometimes people construe that to just being less. That less isn't necessarily better, and more isn't better either. I think Bill Sweetenham says it right. That the old dogs can always learn new tricks, and it's really important they do. But the new dogs need to understand the old tricks work well too. So I think when you mesh those things, I know Terry and I are real close. I've watched Terry train for years. He always has one of the best club teams, and they don't go about it any easy way. And I know Skip sometimes comes by practice and says, well, that's not as much as what we used to do. And even Skip, when he was coaching, Skip modified what he was doing according to the athletes they have. So knowing how to work with that individual athlete and putting those things together, understanding what it takes, it changes things. And I also think there's such a big kicking dynamic now that there wasn't before, that just the mere fact that your kick reduces the amount of volume you're doing. And but at no point can volume replace technique. And at no point you can swim with really good technique and you can swim with real big volume, and both will get you to a certain point. But if you don't combine the two, you're not going to get the very best performance. So it's a mixture of how you mix those things together and put it together. I don't know. These two guys would know better than I.
Yeah, I know. Terry's quite the scientist. I learned so much my years with him. And Terry, what's your take?
Well, I think Greg said it well, that you've got to combine both. But I think there's one thing that a lot of young people in the pool today don't understand, is that they don't understand how hard they have to work in order to get where they want to go. I think science is one thing, but when you start looking at science as an answer for an easy way out, I think that's a mistake. I sat with my daughter in Greg's office when she was being recruited to the University of Florida, and he had said something that I've remembered ever since, and I've shared it with many of my athletes. And that is, he told her, you're better than you think you are, but you're going to have to work harder than you think you're going to have to work to get to where you ought to be or where you want to be. And I think that's so true. And I don't think a lot of kids and parents understand how hard they really have to work to get to that goal that they want to achieve. They drop 4 or 5 seconds in a couple of years, and they think the next couple of years they're going to drop another 4 or 5, and it's only going to be 1 or 2, and then the next year it's only going to be a half a second, and that's hard for them to understand. And so I think hard work and consistency are still the key.
And it takes a lot of time. And we live in I tell people all the time, I think we live in an instant gratification society, but we're in a delayed gratification sport. And not only is it delayed, but the longer you're in it, the more it delays to get less results. And you start out, we talk with the athletes a lot. When you first start out, you improve what you're doing this much and you get this much result. But as you get older, you have to work this much to get this much result, and you work even longer to do it. And that's not an easy sell. And unfortunately, just where you put your hand in the water and making a technique change, and sometimes you might actually go backwards from that technique change before you move forward from it, but you have to do that. And sometimes Skip is really lucky. He probably can speak to it better. I mean, you're working with guys like Joe Auer that have come out of Harry Meisel's program, and they've got great workout habits and they have really good technique, and they were taught at a young age. We don't give those people that work with those young kids enough credit, because that's the key. If they had that coming out, then you add the training and the other things to it. It really makes a difference.
Well, I think the trend that bothered Sid, the trend that I see, and of course I'm not involved anymore, but I keep up with it, is I think when you look at our distance program here in the United States, and you look at the last couple of world championships and stuff, we have 1 or 2 people that are kind of bailing us out, and the rest of it has really gone downhill. I mean, Randy had kids back in the late 70s and early 80s who'd still be scoring. Sorry. But no, and one of the things I really learned from Randy that stuck with me for all those years was, you can work hard every day. You don't have to have a hard day and an easy day and a day off and another hard day and an easy day. You can work hard every day as long as you go about it intelligently and do the right things. And that was one of the reasons I think Randy was so successful, was that we worked hard every day. We didn't have any easy practices. And Randy was real upfront about it. I mean, one of the things, I used to do a lot of his recruiting, and I said to people, Randy's not for everybody, You're going to come in, you're going to work hard. He's not going to pat you on the back. And so those kids that could accept that were the ones that were successful. And, I think he's one of the few coaches in the country that could have taken somebody like Tracy Calkins, as great as Tracy was, in her background.
Oh, yeah.
And I think most people college coaches would have just been happy if Tracy came in and never got any better, but Randy made her better. Of course, Tracy had a lot to do with it. But, if you look at the record there at Florida in the 80s, we had kids that just improved, and they improved every year. And it was through hard work. And I'm kind of like Gregg and Terry. What Terry said is I just don't see that anymore. It's almost like hard work has become a bad.
It's tough, and I think Gregg hit the nail on the head. It's a instant gratification. We've heard that a lot, and we're dealing with a different generation. There's a great quote from Brian Welter that Terry Mull said, "Are you the kind of coach that has it all figured out, or the kind of coach that realizes the more I know, the less I know?" And I do remember being 22 years old and thinking I knew everything, and now 40 years later, I'm looking at it like, okay, there's a lot more to learn. So sitting there with Terry and going down to swim against the Gators, or to go up and swim against Coach Gambrell and Alabama, wherever we drove one week, there were always lessons to be learned. And certainly all three of you gentlemen have been in the shoes that I'm in now. As you get a little bit later on in your career and kids come back to you that you don't realize that maybe you affected, because certainly, Gregg, you're gonna know, okay, well, I had these guys who won these gold medals, and I'm still, I was an Olympic coach and this and that. But I'd like you each maybe to just share a story about, I remember watching the Wooden 30 for 30 or the TED Talk where he said, my two or three favorite players were, and they were two or three guys you never heard of. It wasn't Lou Alcindor, but I'd love to hear a story, Gregg, of a kid that maybe wasn't one of your gold medal winners, but came back later in life and you realize this kid got something out of what they were learning. Do you have any of those that come off the top of your head?
Each of the three programs I've been associated with, I could take in the first couple of years someone that was not the most gifted athlete, but someone that had such a great desire that they're willing to outwork everyone else, and they took themselves to new positions. And those people became key in the programs and the culture of the program. One was I was a skinny little 14-year-old boy when I came there, but he realized he was a distance freestyler and became one of the best. Well, Sid, one of the best open water swimmers ever. And
Bobby,
he just worked everyone else, and he did it in a manner where it brought other people in. So he became key to that work culture we had in Fort Myers, and we had some really good swimmers. David McKay came out of that situation and stuff. They were good swimmers, but they had a pretty good work ethic, and they were real tough kids. When I went from Fort Myers to Jacksonville, it was a little girl named Suzanne Crenshaw. Same sort of dynamic. No real skill set at all, except she'd do what you asked her to do, and when you challenge her, she'd respond to the challenge. Now, she might be one that you have to jump every once in a while, and then you get to her before she leave. But she did everything she did. She went on to be the Division II Swimmer of the Year at South Florida, and she was one that
for Coach Mann.
Coach Mann.
Bill Mann and Lou Manganello had that program.
And she was tough, and she'd come in every day, take everything at a different level. And I think a little bit what Skip's talking about, very much the same thing that he's talking about. She worked hard every day. And when I came to Florida, it was the same type of people. There it was a little bit more, they had a little more skill set though. A girl like Jen Homer, who I had my first year, did everything she was supposed to do, turned into one of the best 400ers. And we had a really good 400 IMer that year that left the program, and Jen Homer did, but a little overshadowed by her. And I want to say Jen was third that year at the NC2A meet, the 400 IM. And another one, not the most skilled athlete, but was willing to do those extra things. And I think that some of this combines with what Skip was talking about working hard all the time. People have gotten so much into recovery, but recovery can be a lot of different things. Recovery can be really, really hard. Your recovery day could be nothing but technique. And for a lot of people, just doing something technically correct is hard. Recovery can be hypoxic work. And just holding your breath is really hard. I remember Randy telling me one of the first years I was coaching, sitting at a bar, he said, hypoxic work's really hard because even your best athlete will cheat if you aren't watching them. So those things like that. And in today's world, the hard part might be making sure that you just come in every day and every turn is on the numbers. You may not be swimming quite as far, but you're going to swim a little bit less, but every turn is really on it. You're going to really work the breakout. You're going to be conscious of when you breathe off the wall, where you're breathing into the wall. A Caleb Dressel type guy, you're going to be conscious of always preparing to swim that last 15, 20 meters the way you want to do it. I think those type of things are hard. And so I think the definition of hard is it's still there, but it's changed a little bit. It's a smart hard now versus just a how much can you do hard.
Awesome. Yeah, those are great words. And I like that idea. I watched the Johnny Skinner thing on the pop turns the other day. He did something on the swim coaches, little internet page. And I'm thinking technology has taken us to a whole nother level now where we can use our smarts. And Skip, what about you and Terry? Some of the stories you have about the guys or the kids that also rans, but had an effect on you or maybe came back. Skip, you got one?
Well, actually, this is going way back when I was at Winter Park. I had a kid named George Stanley who came out for swimming, and I never cut anybody at Winter Park. I'd put the kids that didn't have any experience or hadn't trained in lane one and just keep an eye on them. And George stayed the whole 4 years. Not sure he ever scored in a dual meet. He was kind of like what Gregg was talking about. He was a distance swimmer. And I say distance in high school, you're talking about the 500. And we went to the district meet. And George's goal from almost day one was to break 5 minutes in the 500, which I know now, you probably got 10-year-old girls that break 5 minutes in the 500. But we get to the district meet, and I had really good teams at Winter Park. I was very fortunate. And here comes George Stanley, and he's in the first heat of the 500, and all the kids are standing on the pool deck screaming and cheering, and George goes 4:59.2 or 4:59.4, and all my Winter Park kids just go crazy. And I'm looking around the pool deck, and everyone's kind of looking at us like, what are these guys doing? He's in the first of 8 heats, and he just broke 5 minutes. But and George has gone on to be a very successful individual down in Orlando. And he calls me every once in a while, and we talk about it. But this was just a kid that came in every day and did what I asked him to do. And, he's never going to make the Olympic team. He's never going to swim in college. But I think when I look back at all, and I was very fortunate to be around a lot of great swimmers. That's still one of my favorite stories is watching his face light up when he saw I'd gone under 5 minutes.
I'll bet. I can remember those breakthroughs. Terry, you got a story like that?
Yeah, similar. It just happened this past year. I was down at state, and there was a young lady that swam for me in the early 80s that didn't like following rules much, and butted heads, and she got suspended once or twice, and wasn't allowed to swim in dual meets here and there, and we were constantly arguing about things. But she finally made it through her whole 4 years. But I bumped into her a year or so ago, and she comes up and gives me a hug and says, "I want to hug the man that saved my life." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, all of the things that you were talking about, I finally figured out what they meant, and they got me through some real tough times, and I was able to get through that difficulty, and I want to thank you for that." And I know we've all got those kinds of kids that have come back and thanked us for those kinds of things, and that's what makes the profession, so satisfying. And is to know that you've made an impact. They maybe didn't win a national championship, but they learned life skills that got them through some tough times.
Terry and I shared a guy named Gregg Reeves, who was very much in that same thing. It wasn't real highly recruited. He was a good high school swimmer, Terry done a great job with him, and he was a real tough kid, real smart. He had a little ups and downs, but when he finally got together, I want to say he was third or fourth at the NC2A meet, the 400 IM. And he wrote a great letter to the team. And he said, Coach, hold on to this. I still have the letter. He said, anytime you got someone that feels like they're not doing or they're not patient enough and well in the hole, he said, give them this letter and let them take a look at it. But those kind of stories are really, really special. And it's probably more important now than any other time that kids learn that type of commitment to things, because it helps them get through life, and it makes them the sport produces some people that are real contributing members of society. And
I see Andy Robbins remembers Gregg. I was blessed enough to coach him a little bit as an age group coach in area Tallahassee. And I agree, Gregg. This is a really tough time. And Terry, you bring up a good point that, you know, there's no competitions coming right now. We're not looking at national championships in August for the first time since, I don't know when, since I was alive. I mean, maybe World War II, who knows? I don't know. But there's always been a big national championship swim meet every August since I was born in 1957 and before that. Because I know Matson would talk about it. And you guys know that our coaches, the guys who mentored us. So now we are forced to mentor these kids and adults. Because I'll tell you, I'm finding most of my time now coaching the parents as much as the kids. I've got two great senior coaches with my son Quinn and Raman Walton, the two of them. That, you know, we go out to the beach every day because our pool's still not open. We're at the beach 5 days a week. But the lessons we're teaching aren't about flip turns because we don't have walls. But in theory, what we have to give to our community of swimmers, to our families out there, I think is the same thing that Lamar was given through his 5,000 races and whatever it was back in the 60s and 70s. But through this time, it's a lot different. You know, there's so much going on in the world today. And of course, this whole COVID has thrown us back. I'm interested to hear how you three are really looking forward to the next 6 to 12 months and what kind of messages you can give to anyone who's watching, but certainly that you're giving to any of those that you're in contact with. And Gregg, we'll start with you. I mean, you've got some of the most elite athletes. You got Caleb Dressel you've got a group of kids now. The Olympics were changed, or throw it back another year, this and that. What's the message you give these guys?
I think it's disappointment, but and there's different levels of disappointment. I talked to a club group by Zoom not too long ago, and we talked about the coach was real concerned because the athletes had missed the end of their season. Well, there's always another season. You get a guy like Ryan Lochte, who's 36 years old, 34 years old. He's gonna be 35 at the Olympics. Him having to put it off another year, that's a real disappointment. Or Caleb Dressel, who's the peak of his game, coming off maybe the best unshaved in-season meet he's ever had, and he's getting ready, and all of a sudden they pull that out. But I think the stress of the athletes is it's the journey, and the things you learn from the journey are really important. And we talked to this group age groups, and we talked about it. It's like a train trip. When that train pulls into the station, the station is a swim meet, or wherever you are, and you get off at the station and you swim the swim meet, but you got to get back on the train. If you don't get back on the train, you're going to get left behind because someone else is going to get back on it. And this is no different. This is train COVID 2020, and you may not like the station, but that happens to be where the train stopped. You can get back on and make it worthwhile, or you can stay at the station. If you stay at the station, the people who get back on are going to kick your ass.
That's a great analogy, and I know my young coaches would love it. Coach Mall, I know you have to get off because in just a few minutes they're starting the Florida Board of Directors meeting for Florida Swimming. And I want to thank you for your service, Terry. I can't believe you're still doing all that work. A volunteer, you know, that's one of the beauties of our sport, that we have so many great volunteers, and the extra time that you're putting in the governance makes a huge difference. So Terry, you can give us any of your thoughts and sign off while I kind of see what Kevin DeForest. Go ahead, Terry, you're up.
Well, just along the lines Greg was saying, and what we're thinking about right now, we spend time regularly with the team. When things were good, when things were going well, trying to convince them how happy they should be with the opportunities that they have, with the great facility we had to train in, with the coaches that we had on deck, with the opportunities to go compete. And right now, that's even more true, for them to be able to look back on that and be thankful for those opportunities and look forward to those opportunities coming again. But I think it's real important right now to use a perspective to be happy with what you've got, not unhappy with what you don't have, and make the best out of what you've got. Because we talk also all the time about life's a sine wave, ups and downs. You never know when the hurdles are going to come. And yeah, this is a hurdle, and it's a big hurdle, but it doesn't have to be one that defeats you.
That's awesome advice, Terry. And I got little chills going. I was going to tie up my Speedo and get ready to race again, because and that's how you would do it, as I recall.
River, kid.
I'm just saying, I appreciate the motivation, Terry. How about you, Coach Foster? Do you have anything you'd like to leave us with this evening?
No, I'm kind of glad I'm not coaching anymore right now. So I'm just sitting here watching all these other, we're really fortunate here in Gainesville because we have great coaches in all the sports. And I spent the last 21 years working with a lot of them. And it's been interesting to watch how they've all handled this, because nobody really knows where we're going. I mean, we don't know their soccer season next year, or football season, or basketball, or even swimming. So I don't envy any of them. That's for sure.
Well, certainly the way that we've all come over these last 3 months to see what we know is that we don't know. And I likened it in my team newsletter this week to an open water swim, where you don't really know how long it's going to go, and you don't know where the next wave's coming from. Is it going to hit you here or there? You're trying to do your best to sight and just to breathe, and if you allow it to bother you, the waves coming in. But if you choose to just go with the flow and roll with it, it's kind of like an open water swim. We don't know. We're still not in our pool. We hope to be in. We're doing great training sessions at the beach. We're having phenomenal lessons of life right now. But eventually, of course, we do want to all be back together, racing like crazy in the 50-meter pool or the 25-yard pool, or whatever we love. Coach Troy, I want to give you a chance to sign off this evening. I really, really appreciate the time that all three of you gentlemen have given us. Greg, we go back a good ways. I know you and Terry have been very close. I was lucky enough to be Terry's assistant. I even met you before, I was coaching with Terry, but during that time at Florida State, I know that you and Terry are close enough that even you're the godfather of his daughter, Alyssa.
Great young lady.
A very special young lady, yes. An awesome gator swimmer and a tack swimmer, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
So yeah, I even had to wear gator shirts for 4 years. It wasn't easy.
He doesn't wear them anymore, but he did then.
I remember the first time Terry wore a gator shirt. There were a lot of Seminoles not happy, but I was applauding him because my son Quinn was a teammate and a gator class. He got out. He started with Alyssa in 2013 August. So I was happy to get up there and you know what? It shows a lot more about the sport. Right, Terry, you and Greg have been great friends for more than 2 decades, 3 decades, whatever it is. But Coach Troy, you've seen a lot. You've been around a lot. Give us a little bit. Oh, okay. Is that Keith Switzer? He's very He's going all night, Skip. Go ahead. You get back to Skip before we let Troy sign off. Go ahead.
Oh no, Keith. Now there's an example of what Terry and Greg were talking about. A kid that I won't say limited ability, but wasn't the greatest swimmer in the world, but just through sheer determination, scored at the NC2As, was a great distance swimmer. We stay in touch, and he likes getting on me all the time.
He was a pretty good coach too, as I recall.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he did a hell of a job. So Coach Troy, we're going to let you sign off this evening and give us some words of wisdom, or kind of like something to look forward to as we go through this June of 2020.
Well, I think I'd start with the past, because if one thing I've noticed that has happened in the last 3 months, it's brought the whole world, but especially the coaching community, closer together. There's more of these type of talks that have gone on, and more sharing of ideas. And it probably needed to happen, because I think as I look back at almost 50 years of coaching, when I got into coaching, I had the good fortune to sit at a table in the evening, usually over an adult beverage, and listen to the Randy Reeses and the Jack Simons and then the Jack Nelsons, Terry Carlisles, all these guys, Tom Lamar's. They were all coaching in Florida at that time. And the wealth of knowledge they were able to share and were willing to do is amazing. And they never were worried about someone else getting their secret, because they were going to find a way to get it done, and they were going to take someone else's secret and make it their secret, and they were going to build off it. So they didn't mind giving out the information. I think we went through a time in coaching where everything went backwards a little bit, and everyone they held their cards real close to their vest. I'm not going to tell anyone what I'm doing, because it's real important, and I want to have that one-upmanship. And I think some of that has gone away a little bit with all the talks, things like this, and Zoom conversations, coaches from all over the world getting together because they have time to do it and they miss their sport. I think it's put us back in the situation there's more people sharing what they do. And that's going to make the whole coaching community better, which indirectly is going to help make all the athletes better. And so I think that the athletes should become coming back to the pool with a renewed enthusiasm, one, because what was taken away from them, and two, because all their coaches are going to have some new ideas and maybe a little different perspective, and some things that actually are going to change things to make them actually for the better. And the potential to be there to be really great is limitless.
That's awesome stuff. I really appreciate very much the time all three of you gentlemen have given us tonight, and more so, astronomically so, the gifts that you've given our swimming community through the years. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me and telling a few stories. And to our producer, Joe Auer, who's hiding in the back there.
And thanks to all the comments from the athletes and friends that checked in. Those were really interesting. I wish there was enough time to acknowledge all of them. Hearing from old friends is really good.
Yeah. It's good seeing all of you.
Thanks, Joe. Good to see you, Skip.
Good seeing you, Terry.
Thanks,
Joe,
Skip.
All right. Great comments. And just to sign off, to say, hey, thanks for the stories. Hello.
Join us on the Swim Monkey.
Swim
Monkey.
Monkey TV. On the Monkey.